United States, lynching skyrocketed. Why? In slavery, blacks were considered property. Now, it doesn't make sense to break a table in your house. It's your house, your property. But if that table were to say, to one day walk out of your house and say it's not coming back, you may feel like breaking that table. Because it was once yours, and if you can't have it, it will be of no use to anyone else. And this is the way they viewed us, as property. And when we got free, they did not want us around anymore. And so the 13th Amendment goes, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So, if you commit a crime, whatever they define as a crime, then you can be legally enslaved. Thus, the expansion of the prison system in 1866, where they began rounding us up and throwing us in jail and in chains again. So, by 1886, Brazil was freed, and all of the blacks in North America, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean islands were running around free. And all of the America, free blacks. What a beautiful sight. In 1884, 2 years before Brazil freed themselves, a meeting was called in Berlin, Germany, by the European powers. The Berlin Conference, as it was called, was a discussion of how all of the black nations were free in the Americas and how Europe needed to subjugate someone else. At this conference, they devised a plan called the Scramble for Africa, where the European nations decided which African countries they would invade and colonize. And so, the European nations each chose an area in Africa and fought to oppress and subjugate the people. From 1885 to the 1920s, all of Africa was subjugated to European colonialism, except Liberia and Ethiopia. Well, naturally, we Africans don't like other people telling us what to do. So, we resisted. Much blood has been shed. Green for the land, red for the blood, and black for the beautiful blackness of our skin. It took 30 years from the time Europe fully colonized Africa in the 1920s for the African nations to begin freeing themselves in the 1950s. And every European war is fought over you, O Africans. I'll give you an example. 1914 was the beginning of World War I. At the time, Western Europe was owned by Europeans, and Eastern Europe was owned by the Black Ottoman Empire. In 1914, the Austrian prince was assassinated, creating the First World War. Austria, being an Eastern European country, was a part of the Ottoman Empire. With the help of the United States, France and Britain defeated Eastern Europe and Germany. Germany was an ally to Eastern Europe at the time. Western Europe won World War I, and America, France, and Britain divided the conquered territories of the Ottoman Empire amongst each other. So, the Ottoman Empire, being Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, was divided and given into the hands of the Western European powers. Mind you, we don't stay subjugated for long, and we resist subjugation every step of the way. This entire time, we're kicking up dust all across the world. We hear about the colonization of Africa, and we kick up dust here in America. They hear about the oppression of the African Americans, and they kick up dust in South Africa, excuse me. And now here comes 1933, the start of World War II. The rhetoric of Adolf Hitler was that the Aryan race was supreme. In other words, blonde hair and blue eyes get to pass, and everything else gets killed. ethnic cleansing, genocide. The Jews were the remaining Ottomans in Germany and Eastern Europe who had not yet left Europe. Many of the Ottomans and the Jews in Europe were mixed from 700 years of living in Europe. There were black and mixed Ottomans, and according to the one-drop rule, 1 drop of black blood makes you black. So, they were killing blacks throughout Germany and Europe, and created what was called the eugenics program, which is an agenda to annihilate black people. So, in Germany during World War II, whether you were a Jew or a Christian or an atheist, they killed you if you were black. And the same way in America in the 1920s, 40s, and 60s, it didn't matter if you were Christian, Muslim, or Buddhist. If you were black, your churches and your homes were being bombed. And now today, 50 years later, no matter if you have on a suit and tie or jeans and a hoodie, you can have 3 degrees, a PhD, or no degree at all. And we are still being murdered in America by the system in America and still being thrown in prisons. Economic castration. Police sirens in our neighborhood all through the night, still lynching us. You don't even have to leave the confines of this city, Louisville, Kentucky. From 2000 to 2010, there was a murder each year of a white police officer killing an unarmed black civilian. They lynched Brother Troy Davis, an innocent black man, locked him up for 22 years, knowing that he was innocent. The nation begged and pleaded, and they lynched him anyway. Our young brothers, Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis, they lynched them too. You can put a new name to an old game, but the game is still the same. First, it started as indentured servant, then they changed it to slavery, then to sharecropping, then to colonization, and then to neo-colonization, and now they call it employment. But it's still the same old game. We're the last group to get hired and the first group to get fired. And we get paid the least to do the hardest jobs. White-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs. We are the laborers and they are the owners. We work from sun up to sundown, and we only make enough to keep a roof over our heads. Last hired, first fired. We search and cannot find jobs. We stay without a job so long that we are not included in the unemployment category. There are 3 categories for employment. First, you can be employed. Second, you can lose your job and then you're unemployed. Third, when you stay on the unemployment list past 6 months, you are labeled as a discouraged worker. You can look it up. Now, a discouraged worker means you looked and could not get a job. Discouraged, you stop looking. Societal castration. Since we are not the employers, we cannot get a job as easily as other groups. With bills still coming in and mouths to feed, we resort to alternative means of making money, what they label as the black market, ironically. In 1974, the Rockefeller drug laws were created. It stated that 5 grams of crack cocaine gets a minimum sentence of 5 years in prison. And it takes 500 grams of powder cocaine to get a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. Mind you, black people are the ones who, at the time, were on crack, and white people were doing powder cocaine. So 5 grams of crack gets you 5 years in prison, and about 5 briefcases of powder gets you at most 5 years. And we don't have ships to bring cocaine from Nicaragua anyway. Nor do we have planes to bring heroin from Afghanistan or from Vietnam. So, if the suppliers with their ships, their planes, and their briefcases get caught with the drugs, they get a short sentence. And if you, the user or the customer or the supplier, gets caught with a drug, you get buried under the prison. A CIA agent named Oscar Danilo Blandon taught the drug dealer Rick Ross how to cook cocaine into a crack rock. Blandon was never arrested or taken to court. Ross was sentenced to life in prison and was only freed 20 years later after he studied his own case. Oscar Danilo Blandon is an example of white-collar crime. Rick Ross is blue-collar crime. Societal castration. Here in Louisville, Kentucky, black men are about 5% of the city's population and account for about 60% of the city's incarcerated population. Across the United States, black men are around 6% of the country's population and account for 40% of all prison inmates. And so, what is our solution? Black economic empowerment. Black people live in the West End, but we don't own the West End. It's time for us to own the houses that we live in. It is time for us to own the stores that we shop in. It is time for us to be entrepreneurs and start our own businesses and hire our own people. It is time for us to till our own land and grow our own food. It is time for us to scale our own fish. And it is time for us to build schools for our children and teach our own children. African Americans are the 10th richest nation in the world, but we spend every dollar that we earn sustaining the wealth of other nations. Rich, dollars, paper money, fiat, here today, gone tomorrow. Wealth, land, businesses, posterity, products. Rich, LeBron James, Jay-Z, Gabrielle Union. Wealth, the owners of the NBA, the owners of Columbia Records, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the owners of your house. That's wealth. We are the 10th richest nation in the world, but we own less than 1% of the wealth in America. It is time for us to invest our riches in our own wealth. And again, I say, black economic empowerment. Even in Africa today, much of the land is still owned by Europe. We blacks everywhere are buying everything except for land, which is the only thing that cannot be reproduced. You can buy more shirts and more shoes, but what happens when all of the land is bought up? Another continent will not spring up for us to move on. Monopoly is an important game for us to play and study. It is a race to buy up all the land. The person with the least amount of property will have to spend all of their money renting someone else's land. So even if you have a lot of money, you will have to spend all of it just to keep playing the game. If you spent all of your money buying land in the beginning of the game, you don't have to worry because you will get a return from your investment when someone lands on your property. And just go around the board and Uncle Sam cuts you a nice check for $200. We'll call that tax return. And going to jail is just a roll of the dice. So if you land in jail, and if you have land, then you have money, and you can buy your way out of jail. If you have no land, then you may or may not have money. So you count your money to see how much you have. If you have enough, then you buy your way out of jail and hope not to land there again. And if you don't have enough, you look to your left, they shake their heads. You look to your right, and they shrug their shoulders. Because no one is willing to give you their money for your